What if the freedom Tommy fought so hard for is actually the most dangerous trap of his life? Season 2 ended with smiles, new beginnings, and a company built on family and trust. But Season 3 opens with a question nobody wants to ask out loud. How long can peace survive when every deal is written in oil and every mistake costs blood? Tommy thought starting CTT oil exploration and cattle would finally give him control over his own future. No bosses. No corporations. No one pulling strings behind his back. For the first time in years, he wasn't building someone else's empire. He was building his own. But the problem with building something from nothing is that everyone notices. And in the oil world, attention is never friendly. CTT's first weeks looked almost too good to be true. Cooper took his role as president seriously, trying to prove that he wasn't just the boss's son. He studied contracts, visited drilling sites, and pushed himself to be more than just a lucky heir. Tommy watched him closely, proud but worried. Cooper's instincts were sharp, but instincts alone couldn't protect him from the kind of people who circle new companies like sharks. Galino kept his distance, just like he promised. On paper, he was only an investor. But everyone in the room knew his money came with expectations. When he said failure would have consequences, he didn't mean financial loss. He meant loyalty, silence, and obedience. Tommy tried to convince himself he could handle Galino better this time. He told himself this deal was different. This time, he was choosing the risk instead of being forced into it. But deep down, he knew Galino never forgets a debt. Meanwhile, Cammy was not done playing the game. Losing Tex hurt her pride more than her wallet. She had gambled everything on control and lost it in silence. Now she watched CTT rise from the ashes of her own company, and that made it personal. She didn't attack directly. She didn't need to. Instead, she whispered to the right people. Bankers, inspectors, regulators. She reminded them that Tommy Norris was a man with a history of chaos, not stability. Slowly, doors that once opened easily began to close. Nate felt it first. Financing became harder. Permits took longer. Meetings ended with polite smiles and no promises. Every delay felt small on its own, but together they formed a pattern. Someone was squeezing them from the outside. Tommy knew that look. He had seen it before. Pressure doesn't announce itself. It waits until you are tired, distracted, and desperate. At home, Angela tried to believe in the new life they were building. She wanted to see Tommy as a man who finally learned from his past. But fear doesn't disappear just because hope shows up. Every phone call made her flinch. Every late night reminded her of the times when things went wrong before. Tommy told her it was different now. He told her he had a plan. But the truth was, even he wasn't sure if the plan could survive what was coming. Cooper carried his own weight of guilt and anger from what happened to Ariana. The law let him walk free, but his mind didn't. He tried to bury himself in work, hoping responsibility would drown out memory. Ariana stayed close to the company too, taking her job seriously and keeping her head down. But silence does not heal wounds. It only hides them. And in an industry built on pressure, hidden cracks always spread. The first real test came when CTT secured a drilling opportunity that looked too perfect. The land was rich. The numbers worked. The risk seemed low. But the contract had fine print that no one noticed at first. When Rebecca finally did, her voice changed. There were clauses tying the land back to old suppliers. Suppliers with ties to the man who died. Suppliers who had reasons to hate Cooper. Suddenly, business and revenge began to mix again. Tommy realized that starting over didn't erase the past. It only gave the past a new address. Every enemy he thought he left behind still knew his name. And now they knew his company too. CTT was supposed to be a symbol of freedom. Instead, it was becoming a battlefield. By the end of those first weeks, one thing was clear. Season 3 is not about survival inside someone else's system. It is about survival inside their own. Tommy wanted independence. What he got was responsibility for every life connected to him. Every worker. Every deal. Every family member. The question is no longer whether Tommy can win. The question is whether winning will cost him the very people he built this company for. And this time, there is no corporation to blame. No boss to fight. No empire to escape from. If CTT falls, it falls on Tommy's name. Pressure does not arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, hiding behind paperwork and polite conversations. For CTT, the next wave of trouble came dressed as opportunity. A new offshore prospect appeared on the table, one that could triple their production and finally place them on the map as a serious player. To Cooper, it looked like proof that their gamble was working. To Tommy it felt like bait. The offshore rig carried a familiar shadow. Newsom's name surfaced again, tied to shipping routes and supply chains that were still under investigation. Officially, nothing linked him directly to crime. Unofficially, everyone in the oil business knew better. Deals with him were clean only on the surface. Underneath, they carried consequences. Tommy warned the team that rushing into this could bring the wrong kind of attention. But walking away meant losing momentum. And in business, hesitation is often deadlier than danger. Rebecca dug into the contracts and found more than she expected. Several investors funding the rig had indirect ties to Cammie's network. It was subtle, nothing illegal, just enough overlap to suggest that someone wanted CTT involved in this deal for reasons beyond profit. Nate argued they could use this to their advantage. If Cammie was trying to control the board from the outside, this could be their way in. But Tommy didn't like fighting battles he couldn't see. The problem was, refusing the deal would make them look weak. And weakness invites predators. Cooper pushed for it. He wanted to prove that he could lead without hiding behind his father's instincts. He believed risk was part of growth. Tommy saw himself in that confidence, and it scared him. The same belief had once driven him into deals that ruined lives. He didn't want Cooper learning that lesson the hard way. But leadership also meant letting his son make decisions. For the first time, Tommy wasn't just responsible for workers. He was responsible for the man Cooper was becoming. While business tightened its grip, Angela faced pressure of her own. Rumors spread quietly through their social circles. Old stories about Tommy began resurfacing. Stories about violence, corruption, and betrayal. Someone wanted to remind the world that Tommy Norris was never meant to live peacefully. Angela felt the walls closing in again, the same way they had years ago. She confronted Tommy, asking him if this company was really a fresh start or just another chapter in the same tragedy. Tommy didn't have an answer that could calm her. Ariana's role at CTT became heavier than anyone expected. Workers trusted her. They talked around her. They complained near her desk. She heard things others didn't. One name came up too often. A subcontractor connected to the offshore project had a history of threatening suppliers and forcing cooperation. When she told Rebecca, the tone of the conversation changed. This wasn't just business pressure anymore. It was intimidation. Then came the accident. A minor explosion on a testing rig injured 2 workers and shut down operations for days. Official reports called it mechanical failure. But Nate noticed the timing. It happened just hours after CTT delayed signing the offshore contract. The message was subtle but clear. Delay costs money. Resistance costs pain. Tommy recognized the tactic immediately. Fear was being used as leverage. Galino reached out after the explosion, calm and polite as ever. He offered support. Money. Protection. Influence. He reminded Tommy that powerful friends could solve problems before they grew teeth. The offer sounded generous, but it came with an unspoken rule. Loyalty was not optional. Tommy saw the trap forming. Accepting Galino's help meant tying their future to a man who never invested without owning something in return. Cammie made her move soon after. Regulators appeared at CTT's sites with fresh inspections and endless questions. Permits were reviewed. Safety protocols were re-examined. Everything was legal, but everything was exhausting. Productivity slowed. Costs climbed. Confidence began to crack. Workers started whispering about instability, about whether this company would survive the year. Cooper felt responsible. He had pushed for growth. He had trusted the offshore project. Now people were hurt, and the company was bleeding time and money. Tommy tried to shield him from blame, but leadership doesn't allow hiding. The weight that once sat on Tommy's shoulders alone now rested on his son too. By the end of this phase, the truth became impossible to ignore. Season 3 is not about starting over. It is about being hunted while pretending everything is normal. Every phone call could be a warning. Every contract could be a weapon. Every ally could be waiting for the right moment to switch sides. Tommy thought freedom meant no masters. What he is learning now is that freedom makes you a target. And in a world where oil decides power, targets do not stay alive by accident. By the time CTT reached its breaking point, the enemy was no longer hidden. It was everywhere. In the contracts they signed. In the inspections they failed. In the silence of people who used to answer their calls. Tommy realized that whoever was pulling the strings didn't want to destroy CTT outright. They wanted to exhaust it, drain its money, break its trust from the inside. A slow death was safer than a violent one. The offshore deal returned like a ghost that refused to stay buried. Newsom's name appeared again, this time connected to transport delays, and missing equipment. Nothing could be proven, but the pattern was obvious. CTT's operations were being interfered with just enough to cause chaos without starting a war. Rebecca warned that if they accused anyone without evidence, it would backfire legally. The law could protect them, but only if they stayed clean. And staying clean was getting harder by the day. Tommy met Galino again, this time without illusions. Galino didn't threaten him. He didn't raise his voice. He simply explained how fragile new companies are. How accidents happen. How inspectors listen to certain people. How survival often depends on choosing the right side. Tommy saw the truth clearly now. Galino wasn't offering protection. He was offering ownership of their fear. Cammy made her final play from the shadows. Through intermediaries, she attempted to buy controlling interest in several of CTT's minor partners. Piece by piece, she tried to surround them financially. If she couldn't run techs, she would control the future by owning the competition. Her goal wasn't revenge. It was dominance. She believed the oil world only respected power, not loyalty. And power, in her mind, meant removing Tommy from the board without touching him directly. Inside the company, tension reached a breaking point. Workers worried about their safety. Families worried about their income. Cooper felt like every bad outcome traced back to him. He began questioning whether his instincts were a gift or a curse. Ariana saw him pulling away from everyone, drowning in responsibility he never asked for. She reminded him that leadership doesn't mean standing alone. But pain makes people isolate themselves. Angela could no longer pretend this life was normal. She told Tommy she was tired of surviving instead of living. Tired of waiting for the next phone call that would change everything. Tommy listened, but he had nothing to promise her. His world was built on risk, and now so was hers. The company that was supposed to bring peace had only widened the battlefield. Then the truth surfaced. Rebecca uncovered financial manipulation tied to the offshore suppliers. It wasn't Galino. It wasn't Cammy directly. It was a network of middlemen who profited from chaos. People who sold instability to both sides. They created fear, then sold solutions. They benefited when companies fought each other instead of them. This wasn't personal. It was business. And that made it more dangerous. Tommy understood what that meant. There was no single villain to defeat. No boss to overthrow. The system itself was broken. And CTT had walked straight into it. The final decision of the season came down to one choice. Retreat or confrontation. They could sell while they still had value and walk away alive. Or they could expose what they found and risk everything. Cooper wanted to fight. Nate wanted to calculate. Rebecca warned that truth doesn't protect you from consequences. Tommy stood between all of them, knowing that whatever he chose would define his son's future, not just his own. Season 3 doesn't promise victory. It promises conflict without safety nets. The company that began as a symbol of freedom is now a test of whether independence can survive corruption. Tommy's greatest gamble is no longer about oil. It is about whether he can build something clean in a dirty world without becoming what he hates. Because this time, the danger isn't one man like Galino. It isn't one rival like Cammy. It is the idea that power always wins. And Tommy Norris has never been good at accepting that idea without a fight.